Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
You must understand, I have no solid proof, only my own suspicions. I doubt the truth will ever fully come out. I have nothing to hide, and I have nothing to lose. I just wanted my story to be told. Maybe someday, someone will look back and say, you know, Jeff Johnson actually told the truth. Maybe I'll live to see the day when some sort of justice is done. As I mentioned before, I am a writer. Joe Baker. I was granted permission to write the story of Jeff Johnson, his version of the events surrounding the tragic incident. I will provide excerpts from the prosecution's materials, and Jeff will be able to share his thoughts on what he believes to be true and what he considers lies. I'll also present evidence that was used during the trial. I met Jeff in prison, and here is our conversation. Jeff, I'll start with the phone calls that night. Let me tell you right away that every call I mention has been confirmed by phone records. This includes calls to your home, your wife's work number, and Shauna Skinner's phone number. All call times are accurate, but there's no way to know the exact content of the conversations unless it was stated by witnesses. The first call that evening was from your wife. She called you from work at 4:55 p.m. She said she wanted to remind you that she would be going shopping and to the movies with Shauna. Is that correct? Do you agree with that? Jeff replied, yeah, that's what she said. The next call was from Bob at 5:10 p.m. According to you, he told you that Brad had confessed to sleeping with your wife on your honeymoon and that he, Mark, and Brad were planning to go to Mark's cabin to take turns staying with Darcy. Does that sound accurate? Jeff responded, yep, that was what he said. That idiot mentioned that Darcy agreed to sleep with them if they kept quiet about our honeymoon. I knew Darcy wouldn't do that, but I can't say it didn't make me angry. Your lawyer mentioned that 10 minutes after the call, you tried reaching your wife's work number, but she wasn't available. Instead, you spoke with Cindy, another woman from the office. Is that true? Jeff nodded, responding, yes, that's correct. I asked her to call Darcy, but Cindy said Darcy had already left for the day. She told me that Darcy was going shopping and then to the movies with a friend. I also asked if anyone had used her phone recently, and Cindy mentioned that Bob had called me to invite me to go fishing at Mark's cabin, or at least that's what Darcy had told her. When I asked about seeing Bob, Cindy said he had already left the office to check in at the workshop. I told Jeff, we're already facing an issue with what Bob allegedly told you. Unfortunately, Bob is deceased, so we cannot verify this conversation. The prosecution also found it problematic when they learned from your lawyer that Bob supposedly told you these things. Why would he do this? Why would one man call another and say he was going to sleep with his wife? It seems unreasonable. If we follow your version, we'd have to ask, who put Bob up to this? Was it Brad, Mark, or even Darcy? Do you understand why this is hard to believe? Jeff replied, yes, I understand it's hard to believe, but that's exactly what was said. I continued, this is why you went to the cabin, right? Darcy also mentioned in court that Bob was supposed to call you and invite you to go fishing with Mark and Brad. Cindy said something similar, though she admitted that she didn't hear the conversation between you and Bob. Does this sound right? Jeff responded, I understand that no one believes me, but that is what happened. I asked, then you called Darcy's cell phone, but as you mentioned, it was switched off. You didn't leave a message. Why was that? Jeff explained, I didn't know what to say. She had told me she was going shopping and to the cinema. She had planned it days in advance, or at least that's what she told me. I didn't want to leave a message because I was hoping that what Bob said wasn't true. I then noted, after that, you called Shauna. According to you, she said that Brad went fishing with Bob and Mark, and that he was taking the day off. When you asked her what time Darcy was going to pick her up, Shauna said Darcy had called to cancel their plans. When you told Shauna about the call from Bob, she didn't believe you. Is that correct? Jeff nodded. Yes, that's right. She didn't believe me and wanted to see for herself if Darcy was with Brad. I asked, and then you told her you were going to the cabin to sort things out, and she wanted to come with you? You mentioned you'd pick her up, which would take about 20 minutes from your house to hers. Is that all true? Jeff replied, yes, that's exactly what happened. She wanted to come with me to see for herself. In court, you called Shauna, and she claimed that the men went fishing and that she was going shopping with Darcy. She also testified under oath that she never went anywhere with you. Telephone records later showed that she and Darcy did not speak at all that evening. Do you believe she was lying? Jeff replied, I can't prove it, but she lied. She came with me to the cabin. I continued, Darcy and Shauna both claimed they went shopping and to the cinema. Darcy had receipts for the purchases, and the time on those receipts matched the time of death determined by the medical examiner. How do you explain that? Jeff responded, Shauna was with me when I went to the cabin. This is true. I asked, if this is so, then who killed the 3 men? They were shot with your own weapons from your personal collection. According to your version, they were already dead, or at least possibly dead, when you opened the door and lost consciousness. Later, you mentioned that when you came to, it seemed that they were killed with your machete, which you had taken for self-defense, since you didn't want to kill anyone. These are your words. How do you explain this? Jeff said, I don't know what happened. I didn't want any of this to happen. I pressed. The women had tickets for an 8-hour show, and after you caused a scene at the police station, a wanted notice was issued for your wife. Her car was found outside the cinema. Darcy and Shauna were leaving the cinema when they were stopped by the police. They were both surprised and even a little hysterical when they heard that Brad had died and that you were a suspect. They were even more shocked when they learned that Bob and Mark had also been killed. As a result, the police took them home and questioned them about their whereabouts since 6 p.m. They said that they were together, showed receipts for their purchases, and of course, were seen at the movies. Various sellers saw them, but they couldn't confirm the time, as it was a busy Friday. However, the time on the receipts generally matched their accounts. They may have been dating at some point, but I still believe they were involved in the murders. I've had plenty of time to think about it, and I have an idea of how they could have done it. The problem is that I have no proof. My main question is, why did Darcy do this to me? Why did Shauna help her? Jeff, we may not have the best forensics team, but our investigators are very good. They check every little detail thoroughly. The only thing on the weapon were your fingerprints. There were no other fresh prints in the cabin except for yours and the 3 deceased men's. One of the prosecution's witnesses stated that Darcy, being small and fragile, couldn't have physically swung a machete like that. In his opinion, it would take the strength of a man to deliver such blows. I agree with that. However, Shauna is an athletic woman, and I think she could have handled it. But again, Jeff, this is just speculation. Why would she use your machete on her husband and his 2 friends, who might already have been dead when you got there? This doesn't make sense. And once again, Darcy and Shauna were seen at the mall and the movie theater. Joe, I already told you that Shauna often spent time at our house. I even said that I didn't believe she loved Brad. Thinking back, I remember how often she would talk about Brad and Darcy when she thought I couldn't hear them. I could hear them through the vents, even when they spoke quietly. One day, I heard Shauna say, I hope this ends soon. I can't play the role of the naive wife anymore, knowing that he's constantly cheating on me. At the time, I wasn't sure what she meant. I thought she hoped he would stop cheating, but now I have reason to believe it was related to his murder. Why didn't you tell this in court, or at least to your lawyer? Look at everything I told him. There wasn't a single piece of evidence to back it up. Who would believe me? Who will believe me now? I can answer that question. No one. I knew he was right. No one believed him then, and no one will believe him now. Even I can't say I believe him. There is simply no evidence to support any of his versions. I told him that he could tell me how he imagined it all happened. I think the guys actually told Darcy that they knew about her relationship with Brad. She had planned this with Shauna from the very beginning. As I've said many times, I don't know why she did it, but I'm sure she did. She agreed to meet them at the cabin, and of course, they jumped at the chance to finally get what they wanted from her. As I said, she was a good actress. I think they called me just to show off and brag about what they were going to do. They always teased me when it came to Darcy. They were ready to do anything to separate us, and you could see it in the envy in their eyes. When they saw us together, I think Darcy knew I would call Shauna if I couldn't reach her, which, of course, I did. As for the weapons in my safe, only 3 people knew the combination: me, my father, and Darcy. I think she took the gun out of the safe that morning, or perhaps came home for lunch and took it then. I have so many weapons in my collection that I wouldn't notice one missing unless I specifically checked. Before I went to pick up Shauna, I went to the closet and grabbed a machete. I swear, I only took it for protection, not with the intention to kill anyone. I was only going to find out if what Bob had said was true. When I went to see Shauna, I was in a terrible state. She gave me some pills and said it was to calm me down. Now, looking back, I believe it was some sort of substance I've read about. It works in about 20 minutes for a person of my size, and I would pass out for about 45 minutes to an hour. I think that's why Shauna was worried about how I would get to the cabin. She hoped I would still be able to make it. I think when I picked up Shauna, Darcy had already gone to the cabin. When she entered, she shot all 3 men. I don't know if they were already dead when Shauna and I arrived, but it was clear that they were already lying on the floor. I believe that after she shot them, Darcy left the gun behind, likely wearing gloves, just like Shauna. Then Darcy drove to the mall, which is only 15 minutes from the cabin, and quickly made a few purchases. At this time, Shauna and I arrived at the cabin. I was unsteady on my feet and lost consciousness as soon as I opened the door. I think Shauna took the machete. If they weren't already dead, they definitely were after this. I don't know how she got away, but most likely, after making her purchases, Darcy came back for her. They then returned to the mall and tried to make themselves noticed. At 8 o'clock, they went to the cinema. After that, this whole game began. When the police told them what had happened, Darcy played the role of a faithful wife. She hired me a good lawyer and supported me, although I partly blamed her. She told people that I must have lost my mind for a while because I couldn't remember anything. I was taken to the police station and interrogated, but by that time, the effect of the pill had already worn off, so nothing was found in my tests. The lawyer Darcy hired for me was expensive, so I signed a power of attorney to ensure the money was available for my protection. After Shauna and Darcy were questioned, they were advised to hire their own lawyer to protect their rights. They hired a female lawyer because Darcy couldn't use mine, as he accused her of being an accessory to the crime. The jury deliberated briefly and found me guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. The rest, as they say, is history. I've already explained that Darcy didn't want to raise our son, so she gave him to my mother. She remains married to me because of the prenuptial agreement. It looks like I lost on all fronts, but at least my son is safe and will be raised by my parents. They lost a son, but they gained a grandson. I listened to everything Jeff said. His theory might have made sense, but there was absolutely no evidence to support it. I promised him I would publish his version because that was our agreement. I did not write a book about it, though, because no new evidence was found. Jeff thanked me for taking the time to listen to him. The prosecutor received a copy of this interview and agreed that there was nothing in it that would change his opinion. Jeff's version might be possible, but who would dare go against Darcy or Shauna based solely on his words? To be fair, his parents loved him, but even they had a hard time believing his story. I've written articles and several books as a hobby. I had a regular job to support my family, managing a hardware store for a large company. I promised Jeff I would continue to look into it in my spare time in case something had been overlooked by the investigators. 9 months had passed since then, and I was almost sure that I wouldn't find anything. My wife didn't like that I was paying any attention to it at all. I think she was worried about me, but I assured her I was fine. She said she had watched the entire trial on TV and noticed that Jeff sat in court with a straight face. He barely moved, only shaking his head slightly when he disagreed with any statements. I told her that he seemed sincere in what he said, but agreed that there weren't many convicted people who didn't claim to be innocent. I was going to keep my promise, check a few facts, and see if I could find something that might support Jeff's defense. Over the next 6 months, I tried to talk to various people involved in the case. Some agreed to talk, while others said they had already said everything and didn't want to revisit the matter, especially when I told them that Jeff had asked me to write a book or story from his point of view. I didn't tell anyone that I posted his story online, allowing it to seem like a normal, fictional narrative. Most of those who read my story were divided into 2 camps. One half believed Jeff was a convicted murderer and a liar, while the other half, mostly women who were critical of men, believed Darcy and Shauna were manipulating him and had gotten away with something. One Saturday morning, while going through my notes, I decided to visit Darcy. I think part of me wanted to see her and Shauna, and part of me was curious to see if they would be willing to talk to me. At that point, Shauna was living with Darcy. She had her own beauty salon, and Darcy still worked in manufacturing, though, as far as I knew, she didn't really need the money. Jeff's money, combined with her own, amounted to almost $1 million, and since she had no intention of divorcing him, she controlled all of their joint funds. I knocked on their door, and Darcy opened it, wrapped in a robe. I introduced myself as Joe Baker and asked if I could ask her a few questions. "Are you the same guy who wrote the story for Jeff?" she asked. This wasn't the best start for me, but I answered honestly, yes. I promised Jeff I would give his side of the story, and that's what I did. There was nothing wrong with writing what I was told, except being called a liar and a murderer. But I didn't claim it was a true story, just Jeff's version. She laughed. "Sorry, I just wrote what I was told, as you can see. I didn't claim it was the truth, just Jeff's version, I said. I couldn't believe how calm and kind she was. I must admit, she was even more beautiful than I had heard. As she stood in the doorway, her robe fell open slightly, and I caught a glimpse of her bikini. She was incredibly attractive. The yellow top accentuated her figure, and the bottom barely covered what needed to be covered. You know you're staring, right? Darcy said, with a playful smirk. I was embarrassed. Sorry, I have no excuses, but I'm sorry. She just laughed and invited me inside. She didn't seem bothered at all and didn't attempt to cover herself. She asked if I wanted a beer, and when I agreed, she invited me to sit on the couch while she went to get a drink. At that moment, Shauna walked into the room, also in a bikini. Later, I learned they had a hot tub in their backyard, and Shauna had just come from it, wrapped in a towel. What brings you here, Mr. Baker? Darcy asked. It became clear that neither woman was shy or fearful. I explained that Jeff had asked me to write a book about his life, focusing on the murders that had occurred. Of course, there's nothing more to write about unless new facts come to light. The story has already been covered by millions of people through television and the news, I said. So why are you here? Just checking all the sources to see if everything that could possibly be said has been said, I explained. Jeff still claims to be innocent. We're trying to be polite, Mr. Baker, but you're making it difficult, Darcy said. I love Jeff very much, even though he keeps blaming us for what he did. I think he had a nervous breakdown. Everything I know about the murders I learned from the newspapers and what they told us. I couldn't believe Jeff was capable of doing something like this, but Shauna and I told the truth. We went shopping and to the cinema. We were detained at the cinema and told that Jeff had killed 3 people, including Shauna's husband. What do you think that was like for us? At this point, Shauna spoke up, continuing the conversation. Yes, I admit we had problems, Shauna said. He cheated on me, but at the trial, we told the truth. We even talked about the time we swapped partners, something we now deeply regret. We didn't hide anything. That idiot Jeff went crazy and killed 3 people, including my husband. Darcy and I were afraid that he might come after us when we found out what he had done. Why did you think that? I asked. He must have gone mad for some reason, Darcy replied. He told the police he was going home. We were afraid he might come for us. I don't know what made him so angry. Was there any truth to his story, other than accusing you of the murders? I asked. Shauna answered, there was a grain of truth in most of his words. Yes. Darcy and I love to flirt. But after the wedding, we were with no one except our husbands. We even admitted in court that we made a mistake by doing that on their honeymoon. Everything else is a lie. I've never been with him. I don't know why he said that. What saddens me the most, Darcy said, is that I sincerely loved this man, and now he's making up some idiotic theory and blaming Shauna and me. I don't understand why he's doing this. I tried to support him throughout the trial, but he still believes I was involved. He was the one who went to that hut alone. Shauna was with me, and that was proven. These were his weapons from his own cabinet. He was the one caught leaving the crime scene, but he still blames us. Mr. Baker, could you please leave? Shauna said. I think you've heard enough. You've upset Darcy, and we're trying our best to get over this. Everything you need can be found in the court records. Last question, if I may, I said, looking between them both. Honestly, I'm surprised you're still close friends and live together. Shauna answered, Darcy and I have been friends for a long time. Despite everything that's happened, we still care for each other. We've supported each other through this entire ordeal. For many years, her husband killed my husband and his friends. I came from Denmark, and Darcy has practically no relatives. We became friends, and I in no way blame her for these terrible murders. I have no one here, and neither does Darcy. This event only brought us even closer. One more question, Darcy. Why did you give away the child? I asked. Shauna answered for her. It's none of your damn business. Shauna, stop it. They'll tell him, Darcy said. I've always been a loner. I didn't want to get rid of the pregnancy, but I also didn't want to raise the child alone. Jeff's parents kept suing for grandparent rights, demanding the right to see their grandson. This continued throughout the trial, even after he was found guilty. I wanted nothing to do with his family. I wanted them out of my life, especially his father, who hated me from the very beginning. I decided it would be better for the child to be raised by them. It was the hardest decision of my life, but I thought it was the best for the child. She said this with tears in her eyes and then asked, Please leave, Mr. AK. I hope we never see you again. As I left, there were a few things worth mentioning. These women were polite to me, even though they didn't have to be. They looked as good as I had heard. Both were the kind of women that men dream of. They seemed quite convincing, but something bothered me. They were very close to each other. Some said they were gay, which may have been true, but they also went on dates with men, which could indicate they liked both men and women. What confused me the most was how well they got along. I had a vague feeling there was more to their story than they told. I decided that I would investigate in my free time. When I got home from visiting Darcy and Shauna, I couldn't stop thinking about them. Now I understood how Jeff felt. When you see and talk to such women, your brain simply switches off, and all your thoughts are focused on them. My wife came into the room, and I kissed her. "What got into you?" she asked. "Have you seen enough of the video? The children aren't at home. Let's go make love." I replied, "I just want to be with you." She laughed, but I hugged her and kissed her again. Her body wasn't like Darcy's or Shauna's, but she looked great, and she was mine. We went to the bedroom. "Joe, what's gotten into you?" she asked. "I want to make love to my wife," I said. "This is bad." "You're probably writing your stories again," she teased. When I wrote some of my stories, I was filled with excitement, and on such nights, I usually had a special time with Julie, my wife. "Yes," I said, thinking about what I had written. I wasn't going to tell her that I had just left the house of two women in bikinis. "Joe, what's gotten into you?" Julie asked. "We haven't had intimacy like this in so long, probably before our children were born. Joey is already 8, and Mandy is 6. Is there something we need to talk about?" I admitted that I liked it, but clearly, something had made me act that way. "Let's take a shower, and I'll try to explain everything better." "Go ahead," she said. "But if we take it together, I can't guarantee it won't happen again." I smiled. After we both showered and drank coffee, I told her I had gone to talk to Jeff Johnson's wife. "Why did you do that?" Julie asked. "I thought you had already finished writing about this case." "I don't know," I replied. "On the surface, it seems like a simple matter, but something feels off. All the evidence points to Jeff Johnson's guilt, but these two women, Darcy and Shauna, they were too calm, too confident." "Okay, what were they wearing when you met them?" Julie asked. You can't hide anything from her, I thought. Both were in bikinis and weren't shy about showing off their bodies. Everything Jeff said about them in this regard is true. They could easily lure any man into their schemes. "So you think they're like black widows?" Julie asked. "Darling, yes. I think so. I'm sure there's more to this case," I replied. "I need to help open a new store in Illinois next week, and I thought I might try to figure something out there. Darcy is from Illinois. Joe, promise me you won't see these women again," Julie said, concern in her eyes. "The night after the meeting was amazing, but I'm worried about you. If they actually killed those men, they may see you as a threat." Julie hugged me and kissed me. "I promise," I said. "I'll only do my research online, and maybe I'll go to the library in Illinois to look up something in the archives. But I promise to stay away from Darcy and Shauna." "Can we leave post-intimacy?" Julie asked with a smile. "I can guarantee you that I may have taken you for granted during our 10 years of marriage, but that won't happen again." "I'll love you the way you deserve," I said, trying to reassure her. "You won't tire me out," Julie said. God, how I love this woman. Reflecting on this made me realize how lucky I am. The next week, I went to Illinois. We were opening a new store, and I had to help train the new staff, which left me with a lot of free time that I could devote to investigating Darcy's past. I hoped to find a reason why these men were killed. At this point, everything seemed to point to revenge on Jeff's part, but he insisted stubbornly that he was not guilty. I had already spoken to Jeff's father, and he had given me all the information he could find about Darcy until he came across classified documents regarding her childhood. He had records of the school and college she had attended and ordered a background check on her, but no wrongdoing was found. I decided to start with this data. I went to my local library and found the yearbook section. Her second-to-last class had her name listed, but her photo was missing. She probably didn't have the money for the photo. I was lucky to find several group photos of her. She participated in the choir and was in the drama club. In the graduation photos, the situation was the same. No personal photo, but she was captured in several group photos with the choir and played the leading role in the school play. I flipped through the issue, jotting down names, hoping I could find one of her classmates to talk to. I was surprised when I came across the name Shauna Rosenquist. She was an exchange student from Denmark, and her photo made it clear to me that this was the same Shauna who later married Brad Skinner. I tried to remember her last name from the wedding. It seemed like it was shorter, like London or Lawn. Then I remembered her last name was Lund. Now she was Shauna Lund, and then she became Skinner. I wondered if she had been married before or why she had changed her last name. Now I had information to base my questions on. I asked the librarian if she knew any of the people whose names I had written down. The first thing she said was that she remembered seeing it on TV, that Darcy's husband had killed several people. I assumed that many people were probably following the trials since Darcy was from this town. Because of the wide publicity of the case, even after 8 months, people were willing to talk to me. Everyone said pretty much the same thing. In her penultimate year, Darcy was a loner. She didn't have many friends, and although she was involved in drama and choir, she didn't spend time with other students. Many guys who knew her said she was attractive and asked her out on dates, but she didn't seem to date anyone. One guy mentioned that she was a foster child, and one day when he was talking to her, she said she was staying with a couple named Dolly and Ed Davis. I looked up Dolly and Ed Davis in the phone book and went to talk to them. They were an elderly couple who had been raising adopted children almost their entire lives. They agreed to talk to me. Darcy had lived with them for only 2 years. They said she was a very troubled girl. Her parents had died when she was 3 years old, and she ended up in the foster care system. Darcy was a real loner. The following year, they welcomed an exchange student, Shauna Rosenquist from Denmark. From the day she moved into their home, Darcy had changed in appearance. They were complete opposites, but both were beautiful in their own way. They quickly became best friends. We were so happy for them both, they said. They spent a lot of time together. They were like Siamese twins, inseparable. Wherever one went, the other went too. Darcy's studies improved, and she was accepted into several colleges. She was a very smart girl, and we were proud of her. She completely changed. I think Shauna played a big role in that. Do you know anything about her childhood? I asked. Not really. Her mother and stepfather died when she was 3 years old. After that, she moved from one foster family to another. We usually take older children who have fallen on hard times. We try to surround them with love and help them transition into adulthood. Now, we're over 60, so we can no longer take care of children. Some of them sometimes come back to visit us to say hi. I thank the Davis family for telling me about Darcy and Shauna. They added that Darcy was very depressed when Shauna had to return to Denmark. Shauna promised Darcy she would return someday. I also learned that the elderly couple had not been following the trial on television. I didn't tell them the bad news. I just mentioned that she had applied for a position in our office, and since I was in town, I decided to talk to her for references. I returned to the library to find out more details about the person who had attacked Darcy. His name was Chester Williams. When I looked up his name in the database, it turned out that he had passed away. He was shot during a robbery. He was the owner of a store that was robbed. What was strange was that, after he was shot, a knife had been used. The robbers made off with an undetermined amount of money. I checked the details and found out that this happened 2 years after Darcy had defended herself against him. Darcy was questioned about the case because of her past with Chester, but she had an alibi. She and Shauna were shopping at the mall, and they had receipts to prove their purchases. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? I still had many questions, but I was making some progress. I asked a good question. Darcy had received several scholarships to colleges in Illinois, but decided to attend a technical college in the small city of Newark, Ohio. This was a rather strange decision, considering that the training program lasted only 2 years. According to Dolly, Darcy wanted to leave Illinois and start a new life where no one knew her. I also wondered why she chose Ohio. She didn't seem to know anyone there. Or did she? I wanted to know more about her mother. Jeff told me that Darcy had been raised by her mother until she was 3 years old. At least, that was the story she had been told. I returned to the library and began searching the newspaper archives for the period when Darcy was about 3 years old. I was looking for accident reports. I had no luck with the last name Adams, so I started looking at incident reports week after week. Finally, I came across an article about an accident in which a couple, Carl and Meredith Holder, died. I opened the article and read that this couple was killed when their car collided with one driven by a man named Harold Johnson. The article stated that there was another passenger in the car, a 3-year-old girl named Darcy Adams, the mother's daughter. She was taken to the hospital with minor injuries and then transferred to the guardianship service. I was stunned when I realized that Harold Johnson was from Newark, Ohio. Suddenly, I realized that this was Jeff's father, and it was his car that had collided with the Holder's car 20 years ago. No one would understand this, since Darcy's mother's last name was different. The article also stated that Carl Holder had run a red light and was intoxicated. There were no witnesses to the incident, and Harold Johnson claimed that Carl had caused the crash. Carl had run a red light and hit their car on the right, which caused their car to strike a pole. Carl and his wife died instantly. This information explained a lot. I was sure that Harold Johnson didn't realize that Darcy was the daughter of the people who had died in that car accident 20 years ago. I believe it was sometime during her second to last and final year of school that Darcy began searching for information about her past and came across this article. Perhaps it was then that a plan for revenge started to form in her mind. I made copies of all the information I had found and recorded my conversations with various people. Now, I was wondering how Shauna ended up marrying Brad and whether Jeff and Darcy's meeting was truly an accident. There were so many scenarios running through my head, and it was making me dizzy. I think that's a side effect of being a writer. When I got home, I showed Julie all the information I had gathered. Instead of being happy, she was scared. "Joe, maybe that's enough. You wrote your story. It's over. Let's just move on with our lives." "What's wrong, Julie?" I asked. "I thought you would be proud that I was able to find all this information." "Joe, I'm scared. If these women are really involved in the deaths of other people, and you think they might be involved in this case, they could come after our family. Case closed. You've kept your word and written the story. Can't we just leave it?" "Darling, everything will be fine. I'll just do a little research in my free time. You know me. I can't stop when I find details like this. Please promise me you won't meet them again," she said, tears in her eyes. I tried to lighten the mood. "Oh, so this is about jealousy?" Julie wasn't amused. "Joe, don't joke like that. You know these women could be dangerous. If they find out you're still looking into them." She trailed off, clearly worried. "It's okay, honey. I promise I won't meet them again. I will only do research online, and I'll never contact them. I will never put you or our children in danger. I won't let anything threaten our family. I'm just afraid you already have," she replied, her voice trembling. "Please, be careful. Joe, this isn't one of your fantasies from your books. We're talking about our real lives." I hugged her and kissed her, feeling her anxiety. "I promise," I said softly. "I will do everything I can to protect our family, but I can't let this go unresolved." I knew I had to learn more. I had a connection, well, not exactly a close one, but a fellow writer I had met online. She lived in Denmark, and we had exchanged messages a few times in a writing group where authors helped each other with their work. I wrote to her, or rather, I thought I wrote to her, because you never know when people are using aliases. I asked for a favor, to do a background check on the names Shauna Lund and Shauna Rosenquist. I explained that I was working on a nonfiction story and needed to gather information about a woman who had used these two names. Any information she could find would be incredibly helpful. To my surprise, she responded quickly. Apparently, she knew someone powerful, or at least had connections that could help. She worked in the government and reported that Shauna Rosenquist was an orphan. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 10 years old, and she lived with her grandparents for 2 years, but they struggled to care for her. She became a difficult child. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? She later became a ward of the state, moving from one foster family to another. The government promised her that, for her final year in their high school system, she could participate in a student exchange program and spend that year in the United States, but only if she could learn to control her temper. And she did. She went to the USA on a student visa. I learned what happened that year through conversations with her classmates and her adoptive family, the DeVises. They affectionately called her Sweet M. According to their records, Shauna returned to the United States the following year and started studying cosmetology, a field she began exploring while in America. Her goal was to save enough money to stay permanently in the U.S. 3 months after returning to Denmark, she married Victor Lund. Very little was known about her marriage, except that Victor was an accountant and was 40 years old. Records show that Victor died 3 months after their wedding in a car accident when his tire blew out, causing his car to crash into a pole. No signs of foul play were found. He left all his assets, about $100,000, to his young wife, Shauna Lund. 6 months later, she sold all the property and returned to the United States. We later received notification that she had applied for a position. 5 months ago, she applied for U.S. citizenship. "I hope this information helps you," Sweetum wrote to me in an email. I thanked her and mentioned that this information was invaluable. Now, my theories and suspicions started to come together into a clearer picture. By compiling all my notes, I was able to form a fairly comprehensive understanding of the lives of these two troubled women who were now very wealthy. I continued to check their backgrounds in every possible way, using the names, dates, and other information I had gathered. Julie kept asking me when I would finally stop so we could return to our normal life. I explained to her that I was simply finalizing my research and promised her that she would be the first to read my conclusions. I tried to write in the evenings, after my family had gone to sleep. It was clear to me that this investigation had been weighing on Julie ever since I met these women. She said I had become too absorbed in the investigation, and she was right. But I felt that I had to see it through. I promised I would not contact Darcy or Shauna under any circumstances. Most of what I'm writing here are my thoughts and theories about the relationship between these two women, and while much of the information I gathered could be documented, it was still speculative in some ways. I continued to look into their backgrounds using every available method. I discovered that during her sophomore year of college, Darcy had a roommate with whom she shared living expenses, Shauna Lund. While Darcy was in college, Shauna completed her cosmetology course and received her certification. She worked at a salon near campus, where clients said she was very skilled. There were also several men who frequented the salon, though they were likely attracted to her appearance as much as her abilities. Darcy found a job at a manufacturing company. It wasn't hard for her to find work. Not only was she strikingly beautiful, but she also had excellent secretarial skills. She quickly became popular and dated several men, but as I mentioned earlier, she didn't take any of them seriously. Perhaps Shauna mentioned to her that her visa was about to expire. Darcy helped her complete the necessary paperwork for citizenship, but they feared they wouldn't finish everything in time. It was then that Darcy proposed a solution. Shauna could marry someone, which would give her more time to complete her studies and prepare for the citizenship test. Darcy promised to help her with the process. They needed someone who would fit the role, someone who might consider himself lucky to be involved with them. Darcy met with Brad several times and was confident that he was perfect for the part. She knew that Brad studied with Jeff Johnson, whom she wanted to get to know better. Darcy introduced Shauna to Brad, and within less than a week, Brad was already showing off his new girlfriend. When Shauna mentioned that she might have to return to Denmark in 4 months, Brad panicked at the thought of losing her. Shauna explained that the only way she could stay in the U.S. was by getting married, and that she was working on her paperwork for citizenship. Brad didn't want to lose her, so he proposed marriage. They set a wedding date and planned to marry in front of a judge. They planned to have a large reception so Brad could show off his new bride. It was at this event that he met Jeff. Of course, Jeff couldn't resist attending. He was the best student in their class. Shauna made sure Darcy sat next to Jeff, and everything went according to plan. Jeff, a quiet and insecure person, was unable to resist Darcy's beauty. He could never have dreamed that someone like her would be sitting next to him. At this point, as far as I know, everything was proceeding as expected. All of these men were simply pawns in a game of revenge against Jeff's father, Mr. Harold Johnson, whom Darcy believed was responsible for her parents' deaths. Darcy and Shauna had both gone through similar experiences, and after meeting at the Dyes' home, they became best friends. As they shared their stories, they met again in Ohio and decided to carry out Darcy's plan for revenge. The target was Harold Johnson. Darcy discovered that he had only one child, and she planned to take him away so that he could understand the pain of losing an only child. Thus, their plan began. Shauna married Brad, although she wasn't particularly attached to him. These women were clever, and Shauna quickly realized that Brad still had feelings for Darcy. Darcy observed his every move at work and knew when he was late or when he went home. Darcy began dating Jeff. At first, she simply led him on, but over time, it seemed to me that she developed real feelings for him. He treated her like a queen, doing anything she asked without hesitation. At some point, she was faced with a choice: love for Jeff or revenge on his father. Part of what complicated the situation was that Shauna was already involved in the plan. Darcy proposed to Jeff, and the rest, as they say, is history. I think Darcy didn't really want what happened on their honeymoon to happen. She had real feelings for her husband, which is why she later apologized to him for allowing it to unfold the way it did. Shauna apparently pushed her to go through with the plan, constantly reminding Darcy of their goal. Eventually, they decided to take action, following the script that Jeff suggested. When it came to the actual plan, I believe it unfolded exactly as Jeff described. The only issue was that Darcy had fallen in love with Jeff and didn't want to hurt him. I think she convinced Shauna to let him live and to frame him instead. This way, they could remain innocent and avoid suspicion. I spoke with several male friends who frequented parties every week. They attended a private club where only members and their guests were allowed, and they told me that almost every Saturday, Darcy and Shauna were there too. The club was located in Columbus, about 45 miles away. They danced with each other and with various men. My friends mentioned that they even danced with the club's regulars. Most of the men didn't know about their connection to the past events, since so much time had passed. My friend described the women as very seductive and flirtatious, with men often inviting them on dates, though they always politely declined. I didn't have much more to report on these women, except that they lived a life of luxury. They had a beautiful apartment, a new pink Corvette, and, according to my friends, they always dressed impeccably. I finished writing my report, and when Julie read it, she became visibly concerned. "Joe, what if they find out you wrote this report? We could be in danger." I reassured her, "Don't worry, my name isn't mentioned anywhere in the report. I'm going to give it to Harold Johnson. Maybe it will give him and Jeff some peace of mind. I'm not sure about the law, but maybe this could even give Jeff a chance to appeal. You should be relieved because I'm officially ending this investigation." Julie kissed me, and we decided to go out to celebrate. We took the kids to Red Lobster. A few days later, I made an appointment with Harold Johnson to show him my findings. I mentioned that he could share the report with Jeff and his lawyer. I had completed my investigation and didn't stay long enough for Harold to read the entire report. A few more days passed, and I received a call from Julie while I was at work. She was clearly distressed. "What's wrong, honey?" I asked. "This woman, Shauna, called," she said. "She wants to talk to you. She said you were looking for information about her and Darcy. I told her you haven't mentioned anything about them in months. She threatened trouble if it turned out you were involved. I told her to leave us alone, and she hung up. Joe, I'm scared. I don't trust these women." I tried to reassure her. "Honey, everything will be okay. These women can't harm our family." When I got home, I hugged Julie and promised her everything would be fine. I then went to the bank to meet Harold Johnson, who invited me into his office. "Did you tell Darcy or Shauna that I found out information about them?" I asked. "No, I didn't mention you personally, but I did tell them I found out about the accident that killed Darcy's mother." I apologized to her and explained that it wasn't my fault. Her stepfather had run the red light and crashed into my car. I even suffered a broken collarbone in that accident. I told Darcy that I didn't know it was her parents at the time. She didn't respond, but I think she knew all along. I remember now what she said. "Now you know what it means to lose someone you love. At least you can write to him." After that, I was asked to leave their house. They probably thought that since you wrote this report, you were the one who discovered their past. "I'm really sorry. I gave them copies of your findings." I left the bank, but now I was worried. I didn't know how serious these women were or how far they were willing to go for their revenge. Everything I had learned about their past seemed to support their cunning and determination. Now, I began to seriously worry about my family. The last thing I wanted to do was contact these women. I wanted them to forget about us. Over the next week, this anxiety tormented me more and more. I started noticing that I couldn't sleep, and I realized that this was bothering Julie too. On Saturday night, I tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. I didn't want to wake Julie, so I got up and laid down on the couch, but that didn't help either. Eventually, I decided to go for a drive. I often did this when I needed to calm my nerves. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I stopped at Denny's and ordered breakfast. After that, I went home, snuggled up to Julie, and fell asleep. The next morning, Julie asked where I had gone. I explained that I needed to clear my head, so I went for a drive. I showed her the receipt from Denny's, where I had ordered a full breakfast. Around lunchtime on Sunday, a friend of mine called from Columbus. He asked if I had watched the news. "No," I replied. "My family and I go to church on Sundays, and we just got back." "What's so important, Jim?" I asked. "Those two women, Darcy and Shauna, were found dead this morning. Their pink Corvette appears to have been run off the road. Police are questioning those who were at the club the night before to see if anyone was following them on their way home. They had a habit of annoying men with their flirting. My friend and I were just interviewed. We have witnesses who saw us stay at the club long after they left." Julie asked who had called me, and I said it was one of my friends from Columbus. She had met Jim several times when he managed one of our Columbus locations. On the news channel from Columbus, they reported that early in the morning, two women were found after their car had either slid off or been knocked off the road, falling into a ravine. which led to their deaths. Further reports confirmed that these women were Darcy and Shauna. Their car had been discovered by a police patrol, who noticed damage to a fence. The case was still under investigation. Julie was shocked but seemed almost relieved. She hugged me tightly. On Monday, Harold Johnson called me. He mentioned that he had also been questioned about the accident. He said he had been at home sleeping at the time of the incident and that he had enough people who could do his dirty work if necessary. By Wednesday, an older man, around 75 years old, came forward and said that he had been on that road that night. He remembered the pink Corvette and the two beautiful women passing him on the highway. Shortly after, he was overtaken by a truck, but he couldn't recall anything more, except that the truck was white. A couple of miles later, he saw a hole in the fence and what appeared to be smoke or dust rising into the air. He was about to stop, but his wife urged him to keep going and not get involved. She also reminded him that he had been drinking and he could get arrested. Feeling remorseful, he eventually reported what he had seen. His information wasn't very helpful, but the large tire tracks on the pink Corvette confirmed that the car had probably been run off the road. There were no other witnesses unless the police find a truck with a tire pattern matching the tracks. If that doesn't happen, the case will remain unsolved. Nobody came to me with questions, and why would they? Few people knew that I had written the report detailing what I thought might have happened. About 3 months passed before I heard anything new. I nearly winced when I received a call from Harold Johnson, asking me to meet him at the bank and suggesting I bring Julie with me. He didn't say much on the phone. Harold greeted us as we entered the bank. It was their first meeting with Julie. He invited us into his spacious office and asked us to sit down. He had something he wanted to discuss with us. "Joe, first, let me tell you the latest news," he began. After Jeff was sent to prison and Darcy was granted power of attorney, she gained complete control of his finances. However, she made one mistake. She didn't change the beneficiary on either the life insurance policy or the will. As a result, the entire inheritance reverts to the original beneficiary, Jeff. My wife Claire and I were listed as alternate recipients. We met with Jeff, and he gave us power of attorney. Of course, we now have custody of his son. What about Shauna's inheritance? Who gets it? I asked. It will go to her grandparents and immediate family. This money will help them live out their remaining years in comfort, Harold explained. Why are we here? I asked. Jeff wants you to write his story, a true story. A book about the case, using evidence found at the crime scene, as well as his version of events. He would also like to include information you've collected about the past. He's willing to pay you $660,000 to write this book. My jaw dropped. For a home appliance salesman and part-time writer, this seemed like an incredible offer. I looked at Julie. Darling, I promised you that I would end this story. The decision is yours. Do you want me to write it all? The main characters in this story, except for Jeff and Mr. Johnson, were already dead. We had nothing more to fear. We agree, Julie said, smiling widely as she hugged me. Mr. Johnson handed us the signed transfer agreement and signed it himself. He then gave me a check for $6,000, which I immediately handed over to Julie. What's this for? She smiled. Why are you giving it to me? I've never had $6,000 before, but I'm expecting it tonight, I teased. She laughed and hit me lightly. I began writing the story. Julie asked me why I thought Bob and Mark had been killed. I told her they were just pawns in a game. Jeff had always been the real target, but because Darcy loved him, she let him live. It was all for revenge against Mr. Johnson. Brad had been the glue that brought everyone together, and Shauna just wanted to get rid of him. I concluded the book by informing readers that all the evidence presented was based on hearsay and intuition. This still didn't prove that Jeff didn't kill those 3 people. His lawyer wasn't even sure that the facts presented would give him sufficient grounds for an appeal. The problem, of course, was that both women who could have changed their testimony were already dead. In the book, I was asked to suggest who the killers of these women might have been. I included Mr. Johnson on the list, even though he had an alibi. Perhaps it was someone I had never heard of, someone who owed Mr. Johnson money. Or maybe it was one of Jeff's former cellmates who had recently been released. Or perhaps it was someone from the club who had grown tired of the beautiful, flirtatious women who always turned down their advances. I'm sure readers will have their own theories. Honestly, I didn't know if Jeff had been telling the truth from the beginning. I promised Julie that from now on, I would write only fiction and that I would never put our family in danger again. After showing Mr. Johnson my early work, he hired a new lawyer for Jeff and asked me to discuss with her the details that Jeff believed might have been misrepresented in the case. Jeff's new lawyer was one of the best in the country, Patricia Blake. I wondered why Jeff hadn't hired her from the start, but then I remembered that Darcy had been the one to arrange his first lawyer. Patricia was a beautiful and very serious woman. She wanted to hear everything I had to say. She read my report online and asked why I hadn't stated my assumptions in the text. I explained that I didn't have a particular interest in the case, but agreed to publish Jeff's version after the report was made public. After that, I went to Illinois to help open a new store. Since Darcy was from that area, I decided to do a little digging and discovered many new details. I wasn't sure what to make of these facts, so I relayed them to Mr. Johnson. It was after this that Jeff asked me to write a book, incorporating everything I had discovered. I started telling Pat about some things that seemed suspicious to me in the case. I was also going to ask a few questions to the prosecutor's office about certain points that, in my opinion, hadn't been thoroughly explored. Tell me what you think. I'm interested in hearing your opinion, Pat said. One of the things I brought up was that Jeff had been pulled over by the police after they noticed he was acting strangely behind the wheel. On the seat next to him were a machete and a pistol. The police immediately ordered him to the ground and handcuffed him, calling for backup while continuing to ask him questions. Looking back, I asked myself, if I had just killed 3 people, would I have driven recklessly down the highway with the murder weapons in the front seat? The answer was always no. Some of the questions I asked myself were also raised by Jeff's lawyer, but he was never able to convey his client's position to the jury. There was too much evidence pointing to Jeff's guilt. As I said earlier, I initially thought Jeff was guilty, but now I think differently. This is really interesting, Pat said. Is there anything else you want to share with me? The police spent a lot of time interviewing and collecting evidence. When Jeff's blood was tested, it showed only the presence of alcohol, within normal limits. Any other substances that Jeff claimed Shauna might have given him would have already disappeared from his system. Additionally, when Jeff was allowed to wash at the station, he may have destroyed any traces of gunpowder residue, if there had been any. This is exactly what the prosecution argued. They couldn't prove he fired the gun, but his fingerprints were on the weapon, and it was his gun. Why would he take both a machete and a gun on his way to the cabin? This didn't add up either. I remember Judge Judy always saying, if it doesn't make sense, it's not true. Now I believe there was no gunpowder residue on him because he didn't shoot Darcy or Shauna. They could have easily cleaned their guns before heading to the cabin. Shauna was tested for gunpowder residue, but nothing was found. Jeff later stated that Shauna was with him, which is why she was tested. Now I'm sure she didn't shoot. If we look at the situation from Jeff's point of view, it seems that Darcy shot before he and Shauna arrived at the cabin, and Shauna used the machete after Jeff passed out from the effects of illegal substances that Shauna might have given him. Again, I have to ask myself, why would a man who just killed 3 people drive recklessly on the highway? Personally, I tend to believe that Jeff was telling the truth. This doesn't necessarily mean that Darcy and Shauna were guilty, unless, of course, Jeff is lying. If that's the case, then someone else is lying too, either Jeff or Darcy and Shauna. It's of course easier to find Jeff guilty. All the evidence pointed in his direction, and perhaps it was easier for the jury to believe that the spoiled son, who had always been handed everything, lied. Or perhaps it was easier for them to believe in the innocence of 2 beautiful women who had grown up in an orphanage and achieved everything on their own. You've done a lot of work to figure this out, Pat said. I want to hear more of your thoughts. I also want to take a closer look at the information you found about Darcy and Shauna's past. I sat down with Pat and laid out all my notes on Darcy and Shauna's past. She carefully reviewed all the evidence and even contacted the same people I had spoken to in order to get signatures on all the statements. Since I was simply gathering information, there were no legal obligations or formalities. Pat intended to use this information for a possible retrial of Jeff's case. When we finished reviewing all my notes, Pat asked when I planned to release my book. Although I wrote it as a thriller with elements of fiction, acknowledging that many of my assumptions were not proven facts, the book could help in getting Jeff a new trial. I told Pat the book would be released next month. I didn't expect much of a stir, considering the murders had happened nearly a year ago. She smiled and said, "We'll see." By the time my book came out, Pat had already filed a motion for a new trial for Jeff. Almost all the evidence she used came from my work. Just a week later, Jeff was granted a new trial. The news broke, and it was covered by all the major TV channels. Jeff Johnson has been granted a new trial, Was he guilty of killing 3 people a year ago? Pat mentioned that they were facing an uphill battle since there was no direct evidence against Darcy and Shauna. The prosecution's case was based largely on assumptions and guesses about who might have killed the 3 victims. The prosecutors were furious that Jeff had been granted another chance. They insisted they had no doubt about his guilt. When the trial began, I was called as a witness. I spent 3 days on the stand, recounting my story and sharing the facts I had uncovered. During cross-examination, the prosecutor tried to discredit me, claiming I was just trying to profit from book sales. I told the jury that, at first, I too had believed Jeff was guilty. However, as I started asking questions that didn't have clear answers, I, as a writer, began to search for possible explanations. The more I investigated, the more I became convinced that Jeff might actually be telling the truth. Pat began her defense by explaining that Darcy's parents had died in a car accident in Illinois, and the driver of the other vehicle had been Harold Johnson, Jeff's father. She tried to suggest this could have provided a possible motive for Darcy. Jeff's father hadn't even known about Darcy's parents' deaths, which had occurred over 20 years ago. This was a surprising revelation to the prosecutors. It became clear that no one had previously looked into Darcy or Shauna's past. Pat managed to prove that Darcy and Shauna had known each other since school and had lived together at one point, which stunned many. Pat had to support each of her claims with evidence, and since both women were deceased, she presented witnesses and documents to corroborate her findings. The prosecutors had no new evidence to present. Meanwhile, my book was selling incredibly well. Instead of being viewed as just a writer, I became a respected author of crime and mystery novels. Julie supported me throughout the entire process, and we became even closer. The financial stability from the book helped strengthen our marriage. The challenge was that Pat couldn't prove that Darcy and Shauna were guilty. Her job was to create enough reasonable doubt about Jeff's involvement in the crime. Pat repeatedly asked the same questions that Jeff had asked me. Why would a man who had just killed 3 people drive recklessly on the highway and attract attention? The officers admitted that Jeff seemed irrational at the time of his arrest. They noted that he kept insisting he didn't do it, although they didn't fully understand what he was referring to until they arrived at Mark's house. The officers had initially thought it was a clear-cut case. As soon as the bodies were discovered, it felt like the investigation could be wrapped up. The only people Jeff mentioned were his wife and Shauna, both of whom had been seen leaving the cinema. Their statements were consistent, but not entirely aligned with what Jeff had said. Pat dug deeper into Darcy and Shauna's past. She uncovered incidents of violence against Darcy and discovered that the man Darcy had once defended herself against with a knife was named Chester Williams. He had been shot and killed during a robbery at a small store. The attack had a striking resemblance to the murders in this case. The thieves took money from the cash register. This happened 2 years after Darcy had shot him. Darcy was questioned because of the previous incident but had an alibi. She and Shauna had been shopping at the mall that day, with receipts to prove their purchases. Pat noted the familiarity of the story. Again, a pistol and a knife were involved. Shauna had returned to Denmark, gotten married, and then moved to Newark, where she eventually lived with Darcy. So many coincidences seemed to align. Pat called witnesses to confirm the accuracy of everything I had provided her. She even brought in a writer friend of mine from Denmark to authenticate the documents and present Shauna's backstory step by step. Pat showed that Darcy and Shauna had known each other for many years but had kept their relationship secret. Darcy had introduced Shauna to Brad, explaining that she needed to marry in order to stay in the U.S. A few months later, Darcy became a citizen. During the investigation, Jeff had claimed that he once overheard a conversation between Darcy and Shauna, a conversation they didn't realize he could hear. He said that Shauna had wanted a divorce. The prosecutor accused Jeff of lying, asserting that he had fabricated the conversation. Ultimately, the decision about who to believe was left to the jury. The prosecutor repeatedly argued that Jeff was trying to pin the blame on 2 women who could no longer testify. Pat asked the jury to review all of Jeff's testimony from his first trial regarding Darcy and Shauna. She emphasized that although the women had denied the allegations at the time, accepting the truth of Jeff's words would make them seem guilty. Pat pointed out that investigators hadn't put much effort into digging deeper because they believed they had already found the killer. She worked to plant reasonable doubt in the jury's mind. Some jurors felt Pat shouldn't have called Jeff to testify, but she was confident in his innocence and knew the prosecution could only criticize him, since they had no new evidence to prove his guilt. Jeff was asked about his weapon. He repeatedly stated that both he and his father knew the combination to the safe. Pat then asked him why Jeff took the machete but not the gun. He repeatedly stated that he took the machete for protection, but in the end, he didn't need it, which is why he didn't take the gun. Jurors must have wondered why he would admit to taking the machete but deny taking the gun unless he was telling the truth. The coroner's report from the first trial found the cause of death to be gunshot wounds. Pat once again asked, why would Jeff kill 3 men and then use a machete? She ensured that the jury understood there were no traces of gunpowder found on his clothing. He had been washed and allowed to shower after his clothes were removed. Jeff had initially pleaded insanity on his lawyer's advice, but after being declared sane, he had to change his defense. He chose a not guilty defense because he genuinely believed he wasn't guilty of the murders. Pat explained that when the prosecution asked Jeff what had happened, he again stated that he had lost consciousness. He claimed Shauna may have slipped him something and that he didn't know who killed the men. Jeff took a lie detector test, but the results were inadmissible in court, and the prosecution had them thrown out. However, I mentioned this fact in my book, stating that I believed Jeff was telling the truth. Despite being isolated, the jury could hear about it. At the end of the trial, the prosecutors declared that they still believed Jeff was guilty, insisting that no new evidence had emerged to overturn the verdict. Pat then gave a long speech, explaining how Darcy and Shauna had been friends for many years and kept their relationship hidden from others. She also detailed how both women ended up in a small town in Ohio, coincidentally near where the man lived whom Darcy had considered responsible for her parents' deaths. This fact already raised suspicions. Pat mentioned both the robbery and the death of Chester Williams, the man whom Darcy had once defended herself against with a knife. Chester was killed 2 years later in a robbery, an incident similar to the murder of the 3 men. Pat explained how Darcy met Shauna, helped her find a man for a fake marriage, and later, how she came to know Jeff Johnson. It turned out that Jeff was the son of Harold Johnson, whom Darcy held responsible for her parents' deaths. Harold Johnson took the stand and explained that after learning about Darcy's parents, he spoke with her. According to him, Darcy and Shauna laughed, saying that now he understood what it meant to lose someone you love. When Jeff took the stand, Pat asked him why he thought the women spared him. Jeff explained that at first, Darcy had played with his emotions, but over time, he felt she developed real feelings for him. He described how he treated her with love and respect and could never refuse her. Jeff believed Darcy was probably torn between her feelings for him and her desire for revenge on his father. He also thought Shauna had insisted on getting rid of the men. Eventually, Darcy and Shauna decided to put their plan into action. When it came to the actual murders, Jeff believed everything happened as he expected, with the exception that Darcy loved him and didn't want to kill him. He thought Darcy must have convinced Shauna to let him live and frame him instead, so they could remain innocent and avoid suspicion. Both sides presented their arguments. Now, it was up to the jury to decide. Jeff sat with his head lowered, and his parents sat behind him. Pat had put together a very strong case, and things might have turned out differently if she had been his lawyer from the beginning. However, her goal was not to prove the women's guilt, but rather to establish enough reasonable doubt that Jeff was not guilty of the murders. The jury deliberated for 3 days, and finally, we learned they had reached a verdict. We returned to the courtroom, and Julie held my hand. Now, she too believed Jeff was innocent. The jury looked serious when they returned and took their seats. The judge asked Jeff to stand, and Pat stood by his side as they faced the jury. "Have you reached a verdict?" asked the judge. "Yes, we have," answered the foreman of the jury. "What do you say?" The judge took a sheet of paper from the court clerk's hands. "We find the defendant, Jeff Johnson, not guilty," the sergeant major said. They repeated this 3 times, naming each of the deceased, Brad, Mark, and Bob. We watched as Jeff sat down and began to cry. Pat hugged him as his parents approached. Julie started crying too and hugged me, knowing that my persistence in the investigation and all the facts I uncovered had helped clear Jeff. Harold Johnson came up to me, shook my hand, and thanked me repeatedly. There were tears in his eyes too. In the evening, a celebration was held at the Johnson house. For the first time, Jeff was able to hold his son in his arms. However, he still felt pain because he truly loved Darcy. Julie and I believed that, in time, Jeff would find new love. He was truly a good man. The murders were classified as unsolved cases. Investigators could no longer question Darcy or Shauna, and no new suspects emerged. They never managed to find out who had knocked the women off the road. I will reveal this secret. It was me. I used a company truck that came from our Indiana shop, and the tires had already been replaced. I knew I couldn't let those women hurt my family after everything they had done. They threatened Julie, and I was certain of their guilt. Now, this is my burden to carry, but for the safety of my family, I am ready to bear it. Subscribe to our channel to make sure you're not left in the dark, and stay tuned for the next story, because this one is nothing compared to what's coming next. If you're under 18, we advise you to skip this story and move on to the next one. Click to go ahead, click to move forward, click to continue, click to the next chapter, click to see what's next.